So we have some folks who are on Zoom, and for everyone on Zoom, we have some folks who are in person. My name is Brooke. We're going to get started just momentarily. For everyone who's here in person, you're more than free to walk around. We have a table that's in the back, and meet also with Planned Parenthood for just basic logistics. The bathroom is back behind you on that hallway that's like right through this door that I'm pointing to and kind of to the left. Thank you all for being here. This talk is going to be through a few different speakers. We're going to be handing off sections. And at the end, we're going to have a few asks, and we really hope that you have questions ready. There is a rally that we're hoping you all will be interested in going to. That's at 2 o'clock. So we are going to be time conscious, okay? Especially since it's hot out there, and hopefully you all can get some water in between now and then. So welcome to National Women's Liberation Birth Strike Teach-In. NWL is a radical feminist group who's fighting against capitalism, white supremacy, and male supremacy. We're a radical feminist group that is gender affirming. We were formed in part by the Women of Color Caucus, which we also call WALK. There is, so that was one of our founding groups. And then within our group, within NWL, there is a Women of Color Caucus that is a group of women and trans people who are oppressed by white supremacy, who meet without white women. Today, we're presenting ideas from the book Birth Strike, The Hidden Fight Over Women's Work. This book is one that came out of theorizing work from our feminist group as a whole, but the lead author is Jenny Brown. Jenny also followed up with this book, Without Apology, and the two together are really, really useful. Without Apology is specifically on abortion. So Jenny started with the thought in Birth Strike that the effort to block birth control and abortion in the United States is about the labor of bearing and raising children. Who will do it and who will pay for it? Not about religion, not about being anti-sex, very material. We believe that women's oppression is in part due to many ways that our ability to become pregnant. And we believe that women's liberation and trans liberation are inextricably linked. Women and trans people and those who do not fall within the gender binary do not benefit from male supremacy and are all oppressed because of our reproductive capacity, whether that's perceived or actual. The ruling class thrives on the exploitation of reproductive labor. And those relegated to the domestic sphere are more often expected to fill reproductive roles in society, whether that be through the individual reproduction of child rearing or through generational reproduction in the form of care work. And we believe in the right to self-determination and lives without state interference and policing. And together we are punished by male supremacy. And so together we fight for liberation from male supremacy. Within the book Birth Strike, we do nearly exclusively refer to women and not to trans people. And the book was published in 2019. And since that time, our leadership has, by instigation of newer leaders within our organization, come to the understanding that we only discussed cis women and that we should have included trans people. And we have changed today's talk in response and out of study that our NWL group has done. And we know that we have more to learn on trans liberation. Today, we want to raise consciousness on the concept of reproductive work as vital to all societies, unpaid reproductive and care labor, discuss who benefits from the uneven distribution of care work, and how and why our government and the 1% are obstructing our ability to control our reproduction. And finally, if you agree with most of this talk, then we want to make sure that you feel comfortable in organizing others on these ideas, because we believe that if we have the right framework for why this is happening to us, then our organizing is going to be stronger and more effective, right? But we have to get the right theory first. So in the book Birth Strike, we argue the ruling class has a financial interest in controlling the birth rate in the US and have even obsessed about how low it keeps dropping. I don't know if you all have noticed this, like in news stories for like since COVID started, right? And even before, but it's particularly hot as a topic since COVID started. So The birth rate. Yeah, just how many babies are being produced within the US, right? And even worldwide. I mean, it's not only the US who cares about it. It's great to, I hope that this is interactive because we do want for you all to feel comfortable with these ideas. So the ruling class, what do they want these people for? They want them as soldiers and workers and prisoners. And to be clear, we all need new generations of people, right? We all need somebody to be driving our buses and in our hospitals. And, but we arguably don't need as many people as the ruling class want, right? So this is beneficial work for all of us, but the rate at which they want it is not necessarily good for working people. We need to take advantage of the ruling class's desire for more workers and pressure the ruling class due to our declining birth rate to negotiate better conditions for all of us. We need to go on the offensive. We need to fight for the right of everyone to decide when and if they want to have children, and to keep this power of the birth rate in our hands by organizing and growing the women's liberation movement, because right now, those who produce labor and raise workers are not fighting as a labor class. So put up with me for just a little bit and then we'll switch speakers. So I want to go a little bit into the history that within the United States, there is an established history showing the ruling class's interest in the birth rate, particularly that of Protestant whites. So in 1800, there were no laws on abortion. It was not criminalized. It was not even, there weren't special medical laws around it, okay? So when Alito referenced in his recent decision that there was no history, right? Like there's no history of abortion laws. In the 1850s, the American Medical Association led a push for abortion laws, citing a concern that married women's birth rate was going down. And the AMA also publicly worried that Catholics and immigrants were producing faster than Protestants. So they're using this racist fear of what our country will look like. So in 1873, birth control was completely banned along with abortion. And the chief reason given was that the birth rate had been declining and that married women were avoiding the duties and responsibilities of married life, resulting in smaller families from 8 children per woman to 4 children in 100 years. And in 1905, President Roosevelt launched an attack on women for using birth control, and he claimed that it was race suicide, right? So I'm just giving you like some snippets of things you can draw to look and see that yes, our government has had an interest in our population. I want to read to you a brief portion of Without Apology that talks about the racist reproductive coercion. And so we've seen, just there was this push, there was a change in the mid-50s and a concern about overpopulation. And in this panicking, we've had the feminist movement form some very fixed ideas that we still have now, that the government's concern has been about reducing the number of children. And so this period is burned into our minds because there was horrific reproduction coercion in the form of forced sterilization aimed at women receiving welfare and women of color, and particularly African-American women, Mexican-American women, and Puerto Rican women. And the sterilization operation was so common, it's called a Mississippi appendectomy. And so this testing of contraceptions on Puerto Rican women came out of this history where there were successive waves of coercion, formerly from slave owners using enslaved women's births to increase their wealth, to programs of involuntary sterilization of women of color in the 1960s, to the imposition of long-lasting chemical contraceptions, such as Norplant in the African-American community in the 1990s. And so perpetrators of forced births, forced sterilization, unsafe contraceptions, and other crimes have been used to have used racism to demonize their targets and dehumanize their targets and justify their actions. And enslaved women in the Americas experienced intense reproductive coercion. Starting in the 1600s, slave owners ensured that by law, the children of enslaved women would be the property of the mother's owner, Even if the fathers were free, children became a valuable commodity, and in many cases, enslaved women resisted, using abortifacients and contraceptive methods, such as chewing on cotton root or secretly ending their pregnancies with the help of midwives. And after slavery, the white power structure passed laws to try to keep its Black workforce in place, including laws banning vagrancy and prohibiting debtors from leaving town. But by the 1960s, much of the backbreaking work of cotton cultivation and harvesting had been mechanized. And there was a militant Black working class, and many of them were veterans of World War II, and they were organizing to vote and gain their full rights. And white doctors aligned with power structure and reacted to these changes by inflicting forced sterilizations on African-American women, often when they came to the hospital to deliver a child or for other care. And Jenny goes on to talk about the Mississippi appendectomy, which is very difficult to say, which I was just referencing earlier. And so in response to these racist politics, you see where the Black liberation movement is having their own discussion about who should control the birth rate, and their own discussion, is that going to be, is controlling the birth, if African-American women are controlling their own birth rate, how does that impact Black people within the US, right? And so there's some really great history that's contained Without Apology that I won't go into now. But this idea, because of the horrific history that we have in the US on coercion, from the 1930s to now, then we sort of lost this bigger picture of the value that producing workers and raising workers has, right? And so for some people, the decision that came out yesterday is blindsiding, right? And so, but if you step back and see the interest that the ruling class has had in our reproduction as a whole, then it makes more sense. So Emily is going to lead us with a talk, just a section on international comparisons.
Yeah, my name's Rachel, but yeah, I know you're looking at it. But so as we were, looking at that bigger picture, we started comparing our situation to Europe. So in Europe, the birth rate is as low or lower than in the United States. And we found that there, the birth rate is openly discussed as a problem by the politicians and the newspapers. Efforts to raise the birth rates there focus mostly on making it easier to have children. So fully funding childcare, providing long paid parental leaves. In some places like Turkey and Poland, leaders attack reproductive rights with the open goal of raising the birth rate. And in others like France and Sweden, there are stronger feminist movements and institutions. Governments promote policies where that support parenting and have experienced higher birth rates as a result. Some countries like Russia are doing both. They're increasing maternity leave and monthly government payments to parents while gnawing away at access to abortion and contraception. In all cases, the reasons for the policy are open. How can we get people to make more babies? So again, like they're talking about it openly, we're starting to see it talked about more openly here. That question has led some to an answer that echoes feminists: equality at work. Stephen Kronert, a Berlin demographer, explained, quote, "For a long time, politicians said that the high participation of women in the labor market is responsible for the low birth rate, because when women go into the labor market, they don't have children anymore. But increasingly, when you look at Western European countries, the fertility rate is higher in countries with a higher labor market participation of women." So now, as we said, US politicians and establishment think tanks are now openly fretting about the lowered birth rate. The reasons are they worry about consumer demand, immigration, and its attendant political problems, an aging workforce causing rises in entitlement spending, like Social Security and Medicare, and how to keep the US military strong when both the working age tax base and the supply of young people to enlist are shrinking. But while other countries' governments have sought to make childbearing and rearing easier through government and employer-funded policies, here we see a push from conservative policymakers to keep the cost of birth and care work on families. So, we see right-wing politicians portray themselves as pro-family, but they continue to slash funding for programs that would actually help children and families, like paid parental leave, increasing the minimum wage. They make cuts to early childhood care and school lunch programs. cut funding for welfare payments to parents, healthcare for children, and oppose, anyway. So, why would they do all these things if they're quote unquote pro-family? What they really want is families instead of government. Cut government spending and put the work on families. And by families, they mean women, or mostly women, and women's unpaid labor. One method the employing class uses to push this small government, big families program, as we call it, is to exploit the US ethos of hyper-individualism that promotes having children as an individual economic choice at best, or as an extravagant personal indulgence at worst. Often having children is seen as a lifestyle choice instead of what it is, as Jenny Brown states in the book, a quote, needed job that parents take on at great personal expense, and which the larger community, because it benefits, should support and assist. So if we see having children as a personal indulgence, then it's easy for policymakers to cut funding to the programs that support the work of raising them. And once those programs are too expensive to access, families, and most often women, have to step in and make do. But this burden of cost and care work has made people think twice about having children, thus the falling birth rate, as we stated. Some conservatives believe that an incentive is needed to encourage people to have children, and those people favor cash incentives, tax credits over universal programs. So those don't really have long-lasting effect when the average estimated cost to raise a child is $1 million. Others believe that the way to increase the birth rate is to crack down on abortion and birth control, thereby increasing the population through coercion and forced birth. This squeeze also enforces the traditional family structure that conservatives claim to value so deeply, but we know that it's not really about religion or moral high ground, that religion is a convenient tool to fire up their base, but what they really want is to coerce people into the cheapest, most efficient baby raising unit, which they see as a married heterosexual couple. And this explains the underlying motive for anti-LGBTQ politics and discrimination. And it also explains the big money behind the appalling anti-trans bathroom bills and other attacks on anyone who deviates from the heterosexual marriage and lots of kids model. And I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who's going to talk about immigration.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so there's one big aspect of population movements and demographics that we haven't talked about, which is immigration. So you may be asking yourself how that fits into this picture of how the employing class views these lower birth rates. So they've often turned to immigration as a solution to the problem of lower birth rates, but it causes them some discomfort as well as positive effects. And this contradiction has been a recurring theme throughout US history. So in the 1870s, and again at the beginning of the 20th century, immigration and the birth rate were also often discussed in the same racist breath. If native-born women don't have more children, we'll be overrun by immigrants. Since then, fears of Slavs, Jews, Catholics, and Chinese have been largely replaced with fears of Latinos and Muslims, but the same alarmist claims endure. They're disloyal, they'll bring foreign ideas and religions, class conflict, crime, drugs, won't assimilate, and they'll come to outnumber, quote, real Americans. Still, this distaste for outsiders always seems to yield when employers need their labor. So pro-immigration Republicans are quite candid that they favor immigration to compensate for these low US birth rates. They encourage anti-immigrant bigotry in public, but their actual policies are more concerned with the workforce demands of large employers. The late Ben Wattenberg of the pro-corporate American Enterprise Institute wrote this: "A baby born 9 months from now won't even start paying into life's Ponzi scheme for a generation. And that only happens after we spend a lot of money to raise and educate the child. A quicker fix would be, quote, instant adults. As it happens, they are available, immigrants." So here Wattenberg lets slip a truth that is often hidden in the immigration debate. Immigration is a colossal ripoff of the labor and resources of the mothers, parents, communities, and countries that immigrants leave behind. This is, of course, the exact opposite of the mainstream narrative that immigrants are a drain on the economy and should be grateful to be here. When in truth, Mexico, India, the Dominican Republic, and other sinning countries are subsidizing US employers by raising these workers to adulthood. The billionaire Koch brothers, who are among the largest and most influential donors to conservative political causes in the US, are hardly known for their concern for the well-being of immigrants. But nonetheless, they have been pushing Congress to allow people who were brought to the US as youngsters to stay here. And even Trump, while he was busy building a wall and sending troops to the border to block women and children fleeing violence, he still supported adding 30,000 slots to the H-2B guest worker program. So this guest worker thing, there's a disagreement within the ruling class on a number of issues related to immigration. But one thing they all agree on is that they don't want immigrants to have rights, either on the job or in the community. They favor crackdowns that terrorize immigrant communities and keep workers in line. And they support these guest worker programs that give employers complete control over the workers. So employers can lay off workers during market downturns and then, hire them back when there are market upswings. They can also fire them for raising complaints. And then they don't even have to pay unemployment insurance because those discarded workers can simply be deported. And in keeping with their desire not to spend anything to raise and educate the workforce, Republicans oppose family reunification, which might, from their perspective, bring non-workers like elderly parents or children who might need things like healthcare and education. So it shouldn't surprise us that the treatment of immigrant workers, like that of US-born workers, reflects the needs of capital. As we've seen very plainly during the pandemic, employers may pretend they're indifferent to the demands of workers, but in fact, they're very keenly attuned to the balance of power. At the end of the day, they realize that making up for low birth rates with instant adults isn't a perfect solution to their demographic woes, because it causes them messy political problems, and it isn't a long-term solution since birth rates are declining in many other countries too. And even worse, it may prime the workforce with workers from other countries who have greater class consciousness. All right, so now I think I'm handing it back to, to Rachel, sorry. Someone else is going to speak now.
Hey, my name is Aaliyah. So we've dumped a lot of information on you all. So I'm gonna wrap everything up. It's really hard to get an entire book of ideas into under 30 minutes. So I hope that you have been forming questions because we want this to be mostly interactive. So I have a couple of minutes and then we'll be opening it up for questions. So think about what questions you'll want to ask. So, do I need to talk about? Oops. Okay. So consciousness raising is a radical tool used in feminist groups to find out who benefits and who pays. So as a group, we come together and answer a question about our own personal experience, and then we can find things that are in common, things that are different, but mostly who benefits from our oppression. And that's how we find targets when we're organizing direct action. And so this book came out of a lot of the different consciousness raising events that we held. So here are just a few examples of why some of us stopped having children at just one child or prevented us from having children at all. Okay. So in general, we have costs and exhaustion, right? That's a given. Where we have the double day, people who are women, but also people who work in care work, people that are expected to take on that emotional labor and that reproductive labor burden, right? So we work 8 hours during the day and we come home and we have another 8 hours of work. So we're angry, we're tired, you know, and like a lot of us have the triple day where we still organize on top of that. So there are a lot of people who are out here blaming themselves. And so here are some of the things we found through consciousness raising. Maybe if I'd gotten a better paying job, I could afford to have children or more children. Maybe I could find a job with real paid leave if I were brave enough to quit my job and move back in with my parents. If I could just find the right childcare arrangement. If I'd only found a spouse who worked fewer hours or did more of his share, or the perfect cheap apartment. If I hadn't gone into so much debt for school. So as you can see, these are problems that are created by a system. It's nothing that we individually did wrong, but rather it's a system that relies on our unpaid work to function. Okay. So this battle over abortion and birth control isn't just a cultural conflict that has two different sides or two different views. It's actually that we can't see why corporate owners and establishment planners would have much interest one way or the other. But if we look at it as a fight over the production of humans, how many and the rate and how much does it cost, then employers as a class would have an intense interest. They would care when they're expected to put in resources like paid family leave and childcare. So increasing the birth rate serves an economic purpose, right? If we expand the workforce and there's minimal public spending and maximum unpaid work, then why would employers pay for parental leave when they can get away with not providing it like we are currently experiencing? And why would corporations pay taxes for national childcare if families can be convinced to take on that burden themselves? But all parents are refusing, and our lowest ever birth rate demonstrates that. And that gives us some leverage, because as the birth rate goes down, the value of our unpaid labor is increasing, and it's more clear every day. And so we think it's time to bring the battle out into the open and raise some demands. Okay, so we have 7 demands. Here they are. 1, reproductive freedom, meaning full access and no coercion to have or not to have any children, and all the tools to consent to parenthood or not. 2, those who identify as men and all who benefit from male and white supremacy, we need you to take a fair share of care work, housework, and emotional labor, and acknowledge how racism and sexism influence labor allocation and compensation rather than actual skill or importance. 3, universal health care with expanded and improved Medicare for all, no private insurance companies. 4, universal paid parental leave, at least 6 months, like 50 other countries have, and not tied to our employer. 5, universal childcare, free like public schools. Yes. 6, the protection and expansion of Social Security. We should all be able to retire. Yes. And finally 7, a shorter work week with a living wage. All right, so I'm gonna turn it back to Brooke, and then we'll start the Q&A and discussion.
So for those of you who are in person, you might have a sheet that I'm giving us feedback, and we're hoping like right now today, because for some people these ideas are new, for some people they're not, but if you could tell us like, did anything that we said today change your mind? Or did any ideas stand out to you? And we also want to know, is there anything that is still confusing or that you want more information on, right? Like knowing that there is a book to go to, but like we are hoping that you all will want to replicate some of this in your organizing or all of it. Our other asks are to please come to our next general meeting on July 14th at Curia for those of us who are in Gainesville, Florida at 6:30, and sign up for our emails so that you'll get updates. We have an aid and abet abortion pledge that you can find. Oh, sorry. So Laura is actually like referencing a sign that we have for everybody who's here.
I was pointing to the void. Sorry.
But you can find it on aidandaboutabortion.org. Thank you. We just got the website up, I think, like yesterday. You can also find it on our website for our group, which is womensliberation.org. Participate in the Women of Color Caucus and organize a birth strike study group, book club, or consciousness raising event. We can help you. We have these tools on our website. We have study guides for both Without Apology and Birth Strike. And then for those of you who are in person, please come to the rally at 2. We're going to be doing some consciousness raising. And so we're asking people to respond to the questions. This is a little leading, but Roe was not enough. What do you personally need to achieve reproductive justice? And we'll go more into the rally on what that means. And also, how does this decision from yesterday, the Supreme Court decision, how does it impact you? And it's hard because in CR, we are asking for your personal experience. It's really easy to get into other people's, right? But to try to pull from how you face oppression, you know, yourself. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Does anybody have thoughts on the feedback that we asked or just questions in general? So ideas that stood out to anybody?
Before that, I just want to like pause while you think. So if anyone who wants to sit down can take a seat.
But everybody can move. Nobody's stuck in their seat.
Yeah, sorry, we do have a bunch of speakers.
More seats over here.
So I understand why you just staying back instead.
And then also on Zoom, I think, are we doing chat or are we doing just raise your hand and ask to be unmuted?
So on Zoom, we are very lucky to have Stephanie, who is helping us do the Zoom. She's waving right now to Zoom. Stephanie, is there anybody who you can tell has a question?
Well, anyone has a question, I mean, the best thing to do is you can just raise your hand. So if you go down to participants, there's like a little thing you can select next to your name to just either raise your hand on Zoom, or what you can do is you can send me a direct message on the chat, and then I will raise my hand and ask your question for you. So whichever is easiest for you, tech-wise.
And for people who are here in person, can you hear Stephanie fairly well? Awesome.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, y'all. What are you thinking? Come on. Yes.
I'm still a little confused because I've been following along with everything that's happened in the last 2 days. How exactly is going to affect IVF?
So we just had a question on how, with what's happening in the past few days, how is it going to affect IVF?
Yeah.
Oh.
Contraceptives are an integral part of IVF. So
Oh.
I was just wondering if anybody knows yet how it's going to affect IVF. Because if you say, oh, IVF is going to be taken away, and so does anybody yet know how contraceptives is going to affect IVF?
So, you know,
First of all, I was just going to say, in case people don't know, IVF, we're talking about in vitro fertilization, a method of becoming pregnant. Yeah, if you.
and I didn't appreciate that contraception was really vital to that process. So even within the group that we have here, you know, like I can only speculate that because abortion is a means of birth control, right? And the justices have stated, you know, like we are concerned that birth control will be taken away from us in the greatest sense, right? For daily or for the morning after pill. So for me, I don't know. I suspect that it could absolutely negatively impact IVF. Yes.
And I thought based on kind of this theory, and I have a theory about this, but I think IVF is really expensive, right? So people who are doing that procedure include cis-het women who can't get pregnant otherwise. So I can see that, and it's very popular anyway, so I can see that staying in place, but the access to contraception will be a problem. And there's lower levels of, you know, artificial insemination as well, cheaper levels of less expensive still medical procedures, but they're less likely to take, so that abortion is really important because if something goes wrong with that fertilization, they need to have access to abortion. It might not be, you know, and so sometimes there are medical exceptions, but we can never rely on exceptions as like something that we can lean on for access to abortion. So I think that I can see, I mean, I don't know, but I can see IVF and artificial insemination not necessarily impacted, but the tools, right, to make it all possible to successfully have a child through those procedures will be kind of out of the window. So,
And if I could add on to Emily, and then I skipped over, I don't know why, I'm sorry, but just as far as, our access to contraception within like the past 100 years, like initially, so we had contraception, all birth control completely banned in 1873. And then when we first get it back in this court decision, it doesn't have to come from the courts, right? We could be getting this from Congress or anywhere else. When we first get it back in 1936, it's only access for married people through their doctor. So I also wonder, if just like this access is going to be just channeled through doctors, which there's some great doctors out there, but as an institution, we have seen have not worked for everyone to be able to, access medical procedures that they need. So, yes. So I'm just going to go right to left. So I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just reiterating what you're saying. I know that there are a lot of queer couples that use IVF to get inseminated and have children of their own. And I see that being cut off like pretty quickly, considering trying to be pregnant when you are in a gay relationship is already extremely difficult. There's a lot of like extra steps you have to go through. So at what you're talking about, access to the ability to even start that process, it's gonna just like probably go down.
And on Zoom, can you all hear the audience okay?
It would be best if you can repeat the questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so the comment that was just made was that a lot of queer couples rely on IVF to have children, and speculating that is something that could be restricted sooner than later, as more and more reproductive rights come under attack, and they want to use it to also attack LGBT communities.
So you had your hand up next? No? Okay.
I was gonna say also, not only like having IVF, but the other one will be when you have 6 embryos, people don't want 6 embryos. So this is where it's gonna like not only just affecting queer or people, cis couples, but also now I have 6 embryos and I want to reduce. This is where it's gonna be affected. And legally, I don't think they've come out, but eventually that's what gonna be, which goes into having more children. I mean, because other than, queer couples or something, generally the people that I personally talk about that are doing IVF are white couples that can't afford because they can do it. So let's have more workforce.
Yeah. And sorry, online, I can't see you right now, but could you hear that okay, Stephanie?
If you could repeat it, that would be
Okay.
helpful.
So to summarize the comment, and I hope that she will jump in if I'm wrong, just raising the issue that in IVF, you do see where you have multiple fertilized embryos and that there isn't a legal status right now on what's going to happen with those, but the fear that most families cannot, or most just even individuals cannot support like 6 fertilized embryos. And so without any state support, that is just like terrifying. Or even with the state support, it's a lot. Yes.
So you all laid out some really amazing, inspiring, ambitious campaign demands. I'm wondering, these sound like things that might take 20 or 30, 40 years to accomplish. I think a lot of us are really worried about what are we going to do now? So I'm wondering, what are y'all short?
So the statement question was, like the demands sound really big, like they could take 20, 30 years. What is the short-term goal? And so, yeah, I mean, in this country, we've been fighting for universal healthcare for decades, right? In some ways, we can't put off those bigger, like we have to demand those bigger things right now, right? We're at this real pressure point where we are in a pandemic, right? And we don't have universal health care. Thousands, I don't have like correct numbers, but like many people who had, some sort of like expanded healthcare are now losing it, right? Is this a great time to win universal healthcare? Maybe, they've just publicly slashed our ability to control of reproduction, right? Is this a great time to win universal childcare? Maybe, and is it going to happen tomorrow? No, I totally get that, right? Is it going to happen within like the next 5-10 years? maybe.
Can I add a couple of things? to that?
Totally.
Yeah, okay, so, just want to say, yeah, I agree with what Brooke said, and just want to emphasize that, you know, what we've learned in the history of reproductive rights movement is that trying to ask for less than what we really want does not work, right? If we say like, oh, well, we're gonna talk about these, you know, cases where, you know, extreme cases where the life of the mother is at risk, where there's rape or incest, and we're gonna focus on that to really, you know, show people how important abortion is. It doesn't work for us. We need to demand what we really want if we want to win it. And so that's the first point. And then I think the second point, to, you know, the more immediate question of what do we do right now while we are fighting for these big goals? And I think we have to help people get abortions. We have to do what we can to support abortion funds, to support whatever clinics that are still able to be open, and to support women and people who need to get there.
And that actually, and I'm sorry, yes, no, you go.
Okay, I was just gonna say, and like leverage us as a reproductive class, right? Like if we work together, then, you know, we can go on strike, you know, but we need to build that mass movement to do that first.
And so part of the pledge that we have, right, is saying that we are going to be ungovernable. I know that that can be scary. We're not signing you up to like commit a crime, right? But you are putting out there that like the actions that you would be willing to take are telling somebody about an abortion clinic, contributing to a group that supports reproductive justice, including abortion, right? Taking somebody to an abortion clinic, or giving them an abortion pill that was prescribed for you. There are places that also don't even do prescription, they do like advanced provision when that person needs it, right? And this is also information that we're going to talk more about at the rally as well. Just we wanted to give you an overview of Birth Strike. And so, and Alex really wants to say something.
So National Women's Liberation is going to work or organize for expanding access to the abortion pill as along the lines of this concrete approach that you're referring to. That may or may not be hard. You know, there have been some advances in just last couple of months on the abortion pill access, but we're not only for the abortion pill, because honestly, a bunch of us have testified that surgical abortions are actually easier and faster. So like, we don't want to give up on that, but we also want to have an offensive front. And actually, we'd like to organize for it over the counter, but we also want to be talking with people about that. And then just another quick comment is that in New York State, it was the militancy and broad demands of feminist organizing between 1967 and 1970 that got the law that was the most expensive law, that was the exact basis for Roe v. Wade. So sometimes change speeds up very fast, and Kathy Fairchild calls that like a revolutionary period, that if you can create a revolutionary period, such as like the Black Lives Matter or Occupy, we can get things faster. So some things take 10 or 20 years, and some things take 2 or 3. It's actually kind of based on our ability to make a movement, and also kind of larger conditions like revolutionary movements in other countries that push change here.
Yeah, so I'm going to summarize Alex's point, and then we have questions on Zoom, and I know we have a couple of questions in the audience that have been waiting for a while, so I think we should do it in that order. So Alex's point, well, 2 points that are important was one, that we are also focusing on access to the abortion pill, in addition to access to surgical abortions, and increasing that as an option as other means of abortion become harder to access. And then also the point that progress is nonlinear. And so, you know, sometimes we have, you know, things take 10, 20, 30 years to get done, or even more. Or sometimes, as with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Occupy movement, things change quickly in a short period of time. And so when we can create those kinds of mass movements to sort of catalyze that change, that's what I was looking for, then that can be a much quicker way to achieve what we want. And so let's go to Zoom.
Great, thank you. So the question that we have from a Zoom attendee is, do either of these books cover the low pay of early childhood educators? I work in early education and live on poverty wages, and the solutions offered by so-called progressives seem designed to keep it that way. The cost of getting an education would negate the meager pay raise I would receive.
So Birth Strike just notes what you have said in your comment. And also that within our demands, that universal childcare means quality universal childcare where there is, you know, an enthusiastic wage for those that are raising our children. So, but it doesn't have a separate solution, right? Like part of the solution in fixing that would just be what we need. It's an important system. Is there another question?
I have a question regarding.
I'm so sorry, we're-
Discussion, and you failed to recognize males.
No, I haven't failed to recognize you, but we just have moving right to left, and I'll be right back with you. We just have a bunch of people who are on the computer, so I need for you to hold on for just a minute. We'll be right with you. Was there any other questions, Stephanie?
As of now, we don't have any other questions on Zoom, but just to reiterate, you can either just raise your hand or you can directly message me if you have a question and you're on Zoom.
Okay, so you're fired up. What is your question, sir?
Well, we have done IVF, and I've studied the legal consequences of it, and they reflect the power structure of the government overall. IVF is a profit-making activity for medical institutions. IVF then has special rules with regard to disposal of blastocytes. And those rules allow you to dispose of what would be considered a person or a potential person in a woman's body can be disposed of without penalty. But we're going to have laws in this state, July 1st, which say that if there's a possibility of a fertilized egg in you, that you're slave to that egg. Because you're not a profit-making part of the institution, which this young lady read, spoke to so eloquently earlier. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. Okay. Are there any other questions? Sort of like moving this away. I'm sorry. Yes.
Lots of directly address this woman's question on the short term and then expand the question a little bit. The question was, what's available in the very short term? A long-term project isn't what's available. Because if you're only concentrating on the very short term, each election cycle, you concentrate on that valid evidence stuff. And that's a mistake. Let me explain why.
Alan, would you?
Democratic leadership.
I'm sorry.
Leadership.
Come to the microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's why I'm not gonna be able to.
We're gonna have to summarize everything you say.
So why Val Demings for governor is a mistake is the US Democratic leadership is utterly incapable of defending the slightest reform in the current situation. We have a capitalism that doesn't expand extensively, offering lots of good new jobs like it did after World War II. We've got a capitalism that expands intensively, intensifies the horrors at work, intensifies the environment. How do the Republicans respond to that? Obvious. Move towards white identity fascism. They've done a very successful job in their own terms. How do the Democrats respond? 2016 put up Hillary Clinton, who complacently laughed off Donald Trump. 2018, when there was resistance going on in the streets, Nancy Pelosi worked day and night to get centrist pro-Wall Street veterans as the Democrat candidates in the districts that would win. 2020, we had Black Lives Matter and defund the police. Turn on your TV this weekend, Val Demings will come on and she says, defund the police? Hell nah, fund the police. The Democrats will stick with the institutions of oppression and exploitation as our rights get taken away. And so it's a long-term struggle because it means replacing and getting a different party and movement from the Democrats. And Joe Biden, the most obvious example of octogenarian 20th century centrist idiocy, came on the TV and said, this means we've got to get to the polls. And I knew he was going to say that, and I was kind of half asleep and started drinking. It's my birthday. But then he says, get to the polls so that you can elect state legislatures to legislate on the board. In other words, Joe Biden's saying this decision is for the rest of time. We can't challenge it. No, we need a politics that says the Supreme Court in the 19th century upheld slavery every time. Does slavery exist? No. Why? Because we had a civil war. We had people taking up arms. We had radical struggle. And that's, you know, there is no short-term solution. We need a long-term radical struggle. My-
He was responding.
Yeah, he was,
my-
yeah.
said you had an expanded question.
I expanded her question.
Oh, expanded upon an answer to your question. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, who else has questions or comments?
We'll go here. and
Yeah,
then-
since we haven't heard from you yet. that'd be great.
Just wondering, what is your first step or biggest step in this fight right now? Where should you be focusing our energies? Because if we're all spread out everywhere, it's not gonna be enough in one direction.
I mean, I do think, and we'll have some group think here, as far as the first step is make sure that you're plugged into an organization, right? Because this isn't gonna be like us by ourselves, unorganized is not helpful, right? If you can be a dues paying member of an organization, that's even more awesome. Stephanie is NWL's paid organizer. She's in New York, and having her concentrated work is just invaluable. Like we need more Stephanies, and we, you know, like, and so we need for more people to be able to put their concentrated time into movement organizing. The only way that movement groups can do that is if we can fund those people, because we're all here, you know, unpaid, happy to do so, you know, but you need that concentrated time, right? So I would say that first. For our group specifically, we are asking that people sign our pledge and spread it. And as we're brainstorming what to be doing in this moment, we are asking that if you agree with birth strike theory, to be spreading the idea of why this is happening, because there's so much misinformation about so many different things, right? And the left needs to pull its head together on why we're facing this. And so, you know, given the day after, I knew we knew that this was coming, but like being the day after the decision, that's where we are for right now, right? Like, let's get organized. Let's say that we're going to resist what's happening right now. And let's get on the same page of why this is occurring. Do others have more to add?
Just to quickly reiterate, I mean, so everything you said, absolutely agree. But I mean, even on the left, this is not being talked about, right? So, I mean, it's certainly not being talked about in mainstream discourse, but even on the left, people aren't really talking about the reasons why attacks on reproductive rights are happening. If it's focused on the economy, it's often focused on, you know, the disproportionate effect that these restrictions will have on poor people, which is absolutely a very important part of it, but doesn't get at these root causes of why the ruling class wants these restrictions. Do we have a question on, oh yeah, I'm sorry, go, you're next.
So mine is, I guess, kind of in a question, and it's, I don't know. Anyway, so I know in Without Apology and in general, people talk about not just abortion, but like reproductive justice, which is, as you've said, and as other people have said, a well-rounded thing that just doesn't only focus on abortion, but birth control and living wage and environmental issues and well-paying jobs and lower work week and all of that. And I know that people have been discussing a general strike, which has been well overdue. But obviously in the situations that we are right now, striking in general is very difficult because of our, excuse language, shit pay and horrible work hours and demands that like corporation and capitalism has pressed upon us. So I guess my kind of question or like is how do we help people who are most affected by this without asking them to pay or sacrifice something that they absolutely cannot. So people can't not go to work. People can't, I know a lot of people, the most people that are most affected usually can't pay dues or anything like that. So how do we help those people get the help that they need without too many people, like without creating like a class separation, I suppose?
So, yeah.
So I think a couple of things. So, you know, one of the aspects of the pledge, you know, giving to abortion funds that help people who need access to those resources and don't have them, or, you know, giving to an organization that is working to improve that access. So that is one thing that people can do if you're in a position of relative economic privilege. And then I think the other thing that comes to my mind when you were asking that question is that, you know, I remember when some of us here in Gainesville were having a discussion with some of our members in the New York chapter, someone, you know, being honest about the fact that, you know, they knew this wasn't like something to that should influence their actions, but they couldn't help but think in the back of their mind, well, I'm in New York, so I'll be okay. And I told that person, I was like, well, you know what, like I'm here in Florida and it's scary, but honestly, I have a lot more economic privilege than a lot of folks do in Florida. And I know that if I needed to get somewhere else, I do have the resources to do that and I would be okay, right? And so I think making sure that those of us who are in those privileged positions are just as invested in this fight as people who don't have those privileges is a key part of this, right? Like we have to understand that those rights we have in New York today, you know, we won't have in Florida tomorrow, and those rights that, you know, I have in Florida today because of my privilege, I may not have tomorrow. Like it's just going to keep chipping away, and we all have to, you know, be willing to understand our shared stake in this in order to, you know, have liberation for all of us.
Oh yeah. So locally, in Florida, and yeah.
Of changing things for me to teach my daughters about their bodies and everything they can, so they don't have to rely on the government. But I will show up with you guys.
So for those who are online, there's somebody who's really feeling what is happening right now and how it's going to impact her family, and just testifying to being able to show up to be doing movement work. And I guess not to drag it out too much, but in your question, there was a question on like how to get people involved in a future action that we haven't had yet, right? And that there are some labor organizers who are in the room, and even though I have never led a strike before, I have been informed that you do not strike until you're ready. Strike is not casual, right? So if we're talking about a mass strike, it's not going to be tomorrow. We have to get organized. We have to get prepared. There are strike funds, you know, like, and so to make sure, because no, we cannot go without paying our bills. Like, and so, or at least unless we're going to have like multiple strikes, right? Like a rent strike and lots of strikes, right? So if we're doing that, we need to be fairly organized, right? So I would say, keep focused on what we can do right now, right? Like don't get discouraged because of a future action that we haven't engaged in yet, right? And could get some good groupthink on and some good leadership on. Another is we can't all always organize. Like there are times when like you've got COVID or like you're parenting, like whatever's going on, like you cannot contribute. Figure out what you can do, right? And you can lead by example. I know for people who I love who are not involved in movement organizing, I talk about giving dues because I have lots of friends who are uncomfortable with talking about money, right? So I talk about groups I donate to, I talk about meetings I go to, and so you can lead others by example. And for those of us who can organize, who can contribute, who can show up to a meeting or whichever one of those that you can do them and bring other people with you, you know? And for those who can't, that's okay. Just figure out like what portion you can do, you know, but don't feel discouraged because somebody can't contribute or can't participate right now. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we are over 1 o'clock. I see a hand up on Zoom. So I think maybe we should probably make that our last question.
Yeah, I think, and then for those of you who can come to the rally or anybody who wants to talk afterwards, we did just want to be really conscious of you all's time. And we hope that you go to the table as well for any additional information. But what was the question online?
Yeah, so the question that we have is, do you have any suggestions for resources directed to those who identify as male and getting them on board, or any plans for a teach-in specifically directed at that population? Because unfortunately, they sometimes need a special invitation.
Okay. Well, if you are somebody who identifies as male and no other men, you can organize them, right? Like, we are asking for people to be doing study groups on these ideas, and to be like even replicating teach-ins, and you can do that. I would suggest working with someone who is oppressed by male supremacy on that project, but maybe you will bring in more, more people who identify as male into that discussion. Our demands include things that people who, like benefit from male supremacy would really benefit from, right? Like universal health care, like even frankly, participating in parenting, like is something that everyone benefits from. So I don't think that I think our demands are actually like big tent demands. And you can figure out, I think, if you're able to organize in person with anyone who's in your area, that would be a fantastic next step. And try, because I'm really hoping to be a left-leaning group, that these demands are also part of that group's demands, right? Like expand their work to make sure that it includes these birth strike ideas and birth strike principles. So with that.
Yeah, I
just want to bring up, because you started stuff about me finishing.
Yeah, oh, yes, thank you. There is locally, so Bread and Roses in Gainesville is our abortion clinic. They are amazing. If you
Bread and Roses.
And so if you would like to contribute to them, there is a website, Ain't No Shame. Also, Erica, just Florida wide, what is the website to contribute to abortion funds? FloridaAccessNetwork.org. And so I wish that you could get to Ain't No Shame from the Bread and Roses website, but I don't believe that you can. I think it's a little trickier to find it, but if you Google Ain't No Shame, then you can find it as well. And their Venmo is just Ain't No Shame. Is there a punctuation in that? Okay, no punctuation. So they are wonderful. They also have been getting a lot of intensity from the antis. So if anybody is interested in escorting people, please come talk to me. So, all right.
Yeah, so thank you everybody so much for coming. Everybody on Zoom, everybody in the room here, we're glad to have a great turnout on both fronts. Please come to the rally too. We want to make sure you have time to get a bite of food, a drink, and hydrate before we go out in the heat. But we do have our NWL table in the back. We have Planned Parenthood over there with their table. So please stick around.
And please give us feedback. Everyone on Zoom, please give us feedback. And everybody in person, please give us feedback. Okay.
Thanks so much, everyone.